And again, you do not want to underestimate the extent to which Israel and its supporters are driving this train.
So there's John Mearsheimer on Judge Andrew Napolitano's podcast. He recently jumped on to talk about the influence of the Trump administration and who's really steering things. But what I thought was most interesting about this discussion is that he's not just talking about foreign policy. He actually talks a little bit about domestic policy and the Israeli lobby's influence in that too. Mearsheimer is no stranger to opposing the Israel lobby. He wrote a famous book on it. So I thought this was an interesting discussion. Let's listen in and react to it.
Prime Minister Netanyahu's people, not through his office, but through Defense Minister Katz, announced the termination not only of water, food, and medicine, but electricity in Gaza. At the same time that is happening, the United States is negotiating directly with Hamas, which of course is unthinkable to the right wing in Netanyahu's cabinet. What's your make on that? Is this Donald Trump slapping Bibi in the face? Do they really think they can come to some sort of an agreement with Hamas? This is a group that the State Department calls a terrorist organization, which makes it a felony to do anything to them that aids them. And yet the Secretary of State has dispatched a negotiator to negotiate directly with them.
Well, I think that the United States was frustrated with Netanyahu in terms of negotiating the next step or the next stage of the ceasefire and getting the hostages back. And they therefore decided that what we would do is we would negotiate directly with Hamas ourselves. The Israelis consider this an absolute no-no. They do not think that we have the right to negotiate with Hamas without.
If they don't think we have the right, they should reject all U.S. funding to Israel and make their own autonomous sovereign decisions. That's what I think.
Their permission or without them being there. So they made that clear. And Trump, of course, backed off. And we're now saying we won't meet with Hamas by ourselves again, because we fully understand who's in charge in this relationship.
We know who's in charge of the relationship when Secretary Rubio rescinds the green card of a person he probably never heard of because of statements the person made on the Columbia University campus last April. This, of course, is a big deal here in New York. It should be a big deal everywhere because it's an attack on freedom of speech like we haven't seen in this country in many generations. But I suspect it is the Trump Department of Homeland Security and DOJ doing a favor for the president's Zionist backers.
The truth is, Judge, that the single greatest threat to freedom of speech in the United States at this point in time is Israel and its supporters here in the United States. It's truly amazing the extent to which Israel's supporters are going to enormous lengths to shut down free speech, not only on university campuses, but all across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're turning the word anti-Semitism into a useless word that will go the way of racist and accusations of white supremacist. That word is dying off because any criticism of Israel is innately retorted with an assertion that the person giving it is an anti-Semite. The one area where I'll disagree a little bit with is that there are other forces that are opposed to free speech too, and overtly so. You saw that in the run-up to the 2024 election where, in a week's span of time, you saw John Kerry and Hillary Clinton and AOC and Kamala Harris and Tim Walz all coming out with videos that have similar assertions that misinformation has to be policed harder on the internet. So we're seeing it in many places, but it's hard to deny that Israeli influence is undermining free speech in many cases.
And what can be done about it when the Israelis have the president in their pocket or they're in his pocket? I'm not sure how the analogy goes.
Well, what can be done is very simple. People could speak up about this. They could stand on the rooftops and scream about what's happening and making it very clear that this is a threat to basic American values. This is a threat to liberal democracy. But the fact is, we live in a country where most people would prefer to stay down in the foxhole and not get up and actually fight this battle.
I read Jeff Sachs and I read it together with each other. It's not very long. It's only about 3 or 4 pages. The charging document against Mr. Khalil. It alleges no crime. It alleges no facts. It alleges no misbehavior. It offers no evidence. It simply concludes that in the opinion of the Secretary of State, and I'm telling you again, I can't imagine Marco Rubio's ever heard of this guy. In the opinion of the Secretary of State, his physical presence, Khalil's physical presence in the United States of America impedes the effective execution of American foreign policy. What judge would accept that? Unless the judge is an immigration judge whose boss is Marco Rubio.
I don't know. I mean, you know the legal system better than I do, but the legal system in the past has not worked to prevent Israel and its supporters here in the United States from carrying out acts like this. This is disgraceful. There's no other way to put it. And in fact, it's more than disgraceful. As I said before, it threatens basic American values.
Our mutual friend and presenter on this show, Pepe Escobar, was present at a speech given in Beijing the other day by the Chinese foreign minister, who was asked what is China's opinion on the events in Gaza, and he answered with one sentence: Gaza is for the Gazans. Are you surprised at that?
I'm not sure. Oh, you mean he was saying that Gaza is for the Gazans, like the Palestinians own Gaza?
Yes, this is the opinion of the Chinese foreign minister, presumably speaking for President Xi and the Chinese government.
Yeah, this is hardly surprising. The Chinese have been actually very good on the issue of the genocide, and they've made it very clear that they understand that the Israelis are behaving like barbarians and that this is unacceptable. So I think this is just not surprising.
I thought of you when Pepe said that the Chinese foreign minister made the following statement, and I'm paraphrasing. Of course, this is the paraphrase of a translation from Chinese into English, but I think it's fairly accurate. The United States cannot both be our friend and trade with us and attempt to contain us. That's right up John Mearsheimer's alley, is it not?
Well, the truth is, you would be amazed at how many times countries have fought wars against each other. And in the course of the war, they have traded with each other. There's a whole literature. It's called the trading with the enemy literature. And you want to remember that during the Cold War, the Europeans and even the Americans did trade somewhat with the Soviet Union. And as the Cold War wore on, there was more and more trade between Western Europe and the Soviet Union. So it is possible to have an intense security competition, if not a war, between two countries where they continue to trade nevertheless.
I'll say it again, I've said this before in other episodes, but maybe the worst part of U.S. intervention in Ukraine and Israel is it's driven China solidly into the BRICS bloc and Russia into the hands of China to strengthen that. I just think that's a disaster for the U.S. long term.
Believable. I forgot to play this clip a few minutes ago. This is the boss of Marco Rubio, the boss of Attorney General Bondi, the boss of Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, talking about the freedom of speech. Tell me if you think this is credible, John Mearsheimer. Cut 14.
And I have stopped all government censorship and brought back free speech in America. It's back.
This is, of course, the week before Mr. Khalil was arrested by federal agents who had no arrest warrant or search warrant, who broke into his dorm room in the presence of his wife and her 8th month of pregnancy, yanked him out and shipped him to Louisiana, a place where he apparently has never been before in his life, and notwithstanding the clause in the Constitution that says when the government moves against you, the judicial location must be the judicial district in which the government says you did whatever you did that causes them to move against you. Does this surprise you?
I'm actually surprised at the extent to which Trump and his administration are suppressing free speech. I mean, I knew it wouldn't be perfect once he took office, but I'm amazed. This case that you're referring to involving this gentleman at Columbia University is just the tip of the iceberg. There's just all sorts of activities taking place on the part of the government to shut down free speech, especially with regard to the Israel-Palestine conflict. We have a huge problem here. And the idea that Donald Trump is facilitating free speech and taking off all obstacles to free speech is a laughable argument. I often think when J.D. Vance on February 14th went to Munich and lambasted the Europeans for suppressing free speech. You wonder what he's thinking when he sees what his administration is doing here in the land of the free.
I'm sure he's fine with it. They're selective about this, and that's the most frustrating thing about the right in this, is that the right understandably and rightfully just laughs whenever you hear the assertion of someone protesting U.S. involvement in Ukraine, that they're a Russian agent, that they're pro-Russia, but they don't apply that same standard to the Israel-Gaza conflict. Like, if you say that we don't want to support Israel anymore and we don't want aid to Israel anymore, they're innately called pro-Hamas. That's what they're doing to this guy, Mahmoud Khalil, and it's just a crime. It's unbelievable that you can't, say things in one theater, but the other you can, because it's all politicized.
Here's the Trump administration's border czar answering an unwanted question about the Khalil case. And unfortunately for Tom Homan, whom I've known for many years, he really knew nothing about the case and sort of made up the answer. It's a bit embarrassing, but it's interesting that the feds would speak this way. Chris?
Specifically, if Lakin's law doesn't pass, if this lawsuit against the green light law goes nowhere, what are the different kinds of things you would consider doing? What are the other steps of courses of action you can do? And specifically with that pro-Palestinian student from Columbia, on his arrest papers, what exactly does it say in terms of the charge?
I'm familiar with the exact charge. I can just tell you what my discussions have been with it, is that it's a direct violation of our foreign policy objectives. When you hand out leaflets, incite violence on the college campus, that's illegal. Being in this country with a visa or a resident alien card is a privilege, and you got to follow certain rules. Resident aliens get removed all the time when they commit certain crimes. So he's no different. And he's not going to be the only one. And your first question is about, look, Pam Bonnie's already filed a lawsuit. If she has to keep filing lawsuits, that's what we're going to do. I'm hoping the voters of New York State see what we're doing. And I'm not asking somebody to vote either way. I can't do that. But I'm saying that I think the voters look at exactly what ICE is doing, who we're arresting. I think President Trump has a lot of support for what he's doing.
It's very strange that he would say people who commit crimes and have a green card have no right to stay here, because Mr. Khalil has not been accused of any crime. I think the Trump administration wants to make an example of him and maybe a test case, but they picked the wrong case. They can't allege anything that would form the basis for a proper deportation.
And in addition, they will never go after anti-Ukraine intervention protesters and say, this is pro-Russia, it's against our foreign policy objectives. This is only isolated to things that are critical of Israel.
Shipping him to Louisiana, well, I guess you'd rather, if you're the government and you want to deport some kid from Syria, you'd rather argue before a judge in Louisiana than in New Orleans than a judge in Manhattan. Is that fair to say?
I guess it'll be very interesting to see how judges at all levels deal with the Trump administration in the months ahead. There are going to be a huge number of legal challenges. They're already growing in number. And I'll be anxious to see if judges actually stand up to Trump and his lieutenants in the various moves that they've made. I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, my thoughts are that Trump is rolling the dice in the hopes that the Supreme Court, 1/3 of whose members he appointed, will ultimately back him up. Only one of these cases, there are now hundreds of them, only one of these cases has reached the Supreme Court, and they rejected his argument. It had to do with his ability to fire people without cause, without pointing to us. In other words, fire en masse. The lower courts had enjoined the firing, and the Supreme Court refused to get involved. It wasn't on the merits. It was, is it appropriate for the Supreme Court to get involved now? And the court voted 5-4 no. But these are clearly perilous times. And I say this as somebody that knows him well and has known him for 40 years and knows the people around him. But these are perilous times for free speech. More perilous than any time in my lifetime of which I am aware.
I agree. And again, you do not want to underestimate the extent to which Israel and its supporters are driving this train.
Bold words there from Mearsheimer. It's hard to deny the influence Israel has both on our foreign policy and in domestic policy. I do think this is a free speech issue. They do want to make this guy a test case. And if you think you can deport him, fair enough. Show the evidence, charge him with a crime, have him be tried in his own community with a jury, and press charges against him, and let's see where it goes. Because there's no regulation authority for the First Amendment to impede the speech of someone that's a green card carrier. It's just, it doesn't exist. And the U.S. government didn't even try to do that for a long time. They did initially in 1798 pass the Sedition Act, which did try to target people for bringing the federal government into ill repute, but that was blatantly unconstitutional. Kentucky and Virginia nullified it, and it was just a catastrophe in terms of civil liberty. So charge this guy with a crime. Due process is the standard through which the general government has to go through to convict him, and we'll see what happens. This is crazy in my mind. It is an attack on free speech. The right doesn't want to hear that, but they wouldn't hold the same standard when it comes to people that are opposing the Ukraine war. And then the accusations from the administration are not going to be, well, he's pro-Putin calling on violence against Ukrainians. They would never do that. So, but I want to hear what you guys think. Do you think that Napolitano and Mearsheimer are right about this? To what extent does the Israel lobby control things? And like the video, subscribe to the channel, and as you guys all know, our motto is no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out. I'll see you guys on the next one.